Dear friends, welcome to another episode of Aligarh Society of History and Archaeology, ASHA, and Ganga Jamni lecture series. I am sorry due to certain technical issues, we are late by a few minutes. Today, we are honored to have a very reputed and well appreciated speaker back with us again. I mean, Dr. Katherine Schofield, who had graced this forum once before too. All of us by now know her well. Her work as a scholar of music during medieval period in India is recognized throughout the academic world. She had spoken to us in November last on the development of music during the 17th century. Today, she is back with us again. This time to speak on yet another very significant but unfortunately neglected theme, Mughals, music and films. Through her researches, based on primary sources, she has established music as central to Mughal technologies of sovereignty and selfhood. Her works have also located the relationship of Ragmala paintings to their melodic inspirations in shared notions of power, told tales about ill-fated courtesans and legendary ustads, and traced the lineage of the chief musicians to the Mughal emperors from Akbar to Bahadur Shah Zafar. She has many publications to her credit. But as I said earlier in November, her paper, Did Aurangzeb Ban Music?, is one of her most well-read works. Without any further ado, I will invite her to speak on the much anticipated topic of today. Let us hear from her about the way the Mughals have been portrayed in Bollywood through films and songs. Over to you, Katherine.
Thank you very much for a lovely introduction again. And hello, everybody. This is going to be quite a light, entertaining session. And I'm sure there's a lot that I can learn from you about these issues as well. What I'm going to do is I'm going to look at a few films of the historical epic nature featuring the Mughals, and you will be not at all surprised to know that the first one on my list is going to be Mughal-e-Azam. And throughout cinematic history in India, there have been many fine historical films that have been set in the Mughal era. And a surprising number of them feature musicians and or courtesans as major characters. And this extends actually into the period of the princely states and of the Nawabs. And I'm thinking particularly of Jahan, the 1981 Lucknow version, which is my favorite film. But we're looking back further now, and we're going to look at the Mughals proper. So it's actually really interesting to think about how the Mughals are entwined with both music and with film, how music is and musicians are represented on film, how they are received in the modern day, and how that music adds both to a sense of faithfulness to the Mughal era, but also can change things, because, you know, as we'll see, the big purpose of music really is to change our emotions, to make us feel things differently, to manipulate us sometimes. So I'm going to try to share a pile of slides now. There's quite a lot of slides, which I'm going to go through quite quickly. Hopefully this will work. So just give me a second. We didn't get a chance to test this, so I'm going to test your patience now. Right. Share screen. Okay, what am I sharing? It's this one. Okay. Right. Can you see my screen? Oh, excellent. That is lovely. Right. I think I'll share it just like that, actually, because it will help us to sort of navigate and help you to see where we're going next. Okay, so Mughals, music and the movies or the films. And this, of course, is the Qawwali scene, Khaja Mere Khaja from Jodha Akbar, 2008. But we're going to start with the great 1960 epic Mughal-e-Azam, one of the greatest Hindi films of all time. It really needs no introduction. Music by the great Naushad, lyrics by the wonderful Shakil Badauni, featuring Prithviraj Kapoor as Akbar, Dilip Kumar as Salim, and Madhupala as Anarkali, who is the main character, I would suggest, in the plot. She calls herself a Kanise, a slave girl, but she plays the role.
Excuse me, can you have it full screen?
Yes. Would you like to see it full screen? We can do that.
Yes, please.
Tell me if that's working. Is that working? Is that working?
It is fine.
Good. Excellent. Right. Okay. It does look better bigger. Okay. So this is she calls herself a Kanise, and she dedicates herself, in fact, to the empire. She, in fact, sacrifices herself in the end, both for Salim, her true love, and for the empire by doing her duty by pretending to him that she's been executed. But of course, the great Akbar, the great humanist, lets her go at the end, which is a very modern ending to the tale. It is based on a story from the time. It was first reported in the reign of Jahangir as kind of bizarre gossip by a European traveller who came back with the story of Anarkali, the beautiful courtesan who Salim had fallen in love with, and who, as a punishment, the emperor had walled her up alive. This rather gruesome punishment. As a matter of fact, it would have been perfectly normal for Salim to have fallen in love with any number of courtesans, and indeed to have married them and taken them into his harem. So who knows whether or not it's a real story? There is, of course, the famous Anarkali grave in Lahore. But all of that is irrelevant, because what matters today is the truths that are told through stories, even if the stories themselves are fictional or fictionalized. What values lie in these stories? So I'm going to start with the role and place of music and musicians and dancers at the Mughal court itself, rather than in cinema. Here we have a painting of a musical gathering. So, as I said in my last talk, the principal role of music was to move the emotions. It could be used as a technology to transform one's emotional state, whether that be to arouse the fires of love or to calm them down, but also in not just sort of intimate emotions like that, but also really big emotions like celebratory emotions. Both musicians and dancers were regarded as auspicious, and they had to be there at the astrologically prescribed time. And the Mughals and Europeans and everybody else believed fully in astrology in this period, in order for their music to bless whatever celebration it happened to be. And so the famous story, which is enacted in the film Sangeet Samrat Tansen, which I'm not going to talk about today, actually, where Tansen sings Rag Deepak and sets the court on fire. And his daughter Saraswati has to come and sing Rag Meg and bring the rain in order to calm the fire down. This story actually has an element of truth in the sense that the Mughals really did believe that music could push the emotions in one way or another, or and in fact not just the emotions of individuals, but of the body politic of the court, but also the natural world. So this idea that this, this sort of legend that's come down to us, and incidentally, the first recension that I've found of this story is about Lord Shiv and Parvati, and not about Tansen and his daughter Saraswati. It's not an unrealistic, it's got those grains of truth about it, but what the story is actually about is the power of music to act as a deus ex machina, if you like, in a plot, act as a kind of a catalyst for something happening, which is one of the reasons why I think musicians and courtesans become these really important characters in a lot of these historical epics. So just a very quick look at the kinds of scenarios that musicians and dancers were involved with. You have great courtly musicians like the Galawants, the most important of whom at Akbar's court was, of course, Tansen, and their role was really to perform intimate rag music, both for the emperor's mehfil, but also on grand court occasions, but for exclusive gatherings. Not, this is not a noisy music. This is not the loud music that you're going to be hearing at a big celebration. There were also qawwals, incredibly important set of musicians and really quite versatile in this period. They were attached to the Sufi shrines, of course, and performed their role as hereditary shrine musicians to bring devotees into a state of hal or vajd, sort of ecstatic communion with the divine beloved. But they also sang in the Mughal court from the 17th century onwards, genres like khayal, which arose in about 1660 as the preeminent song genre of the Mughal court, sung by, it was the intellectual property at the time of the qawwals, and only later in the 18th century did great Galawants like Sadarang take it up and transform it into a different style of khayal. And of course, you had a range of female musicians, some of whom worked exclusively in the haram or the zanana, others of whom worked exclusively in male space, such as courtesans like Anarkali. And you have all sorts of scope with music and musicians in a song film genre like the Hindi film, to produce all sorts of different types of Bollywood extravaganzas, which are in some ways true to life. So you had all sorts of scenarios. You have the intimate mehfil. You have music and poetry competitions. And the really famous one from Mughal-e-Azam is Teri Mehfil Mein, where you have Bahar and Anarkali set off against one another to compete in performance for the love of or the honor of Salim. It's not actually the love because it's all performed rather than real, although it's ambiguous. And of course, on large scale events, births, marriages, deaths, anniversaries of various kinds, birthday weighings, and victory celebrations after coming back from war. And this is the context of a number of performances in Mughal films. So, you know, we have all these big excuses sort of ready-made in the Mughal historical epic for big mass Bollywood numbers. It is worth remembering again that the film music is not entirely accurate. We need to remember that this is an attempt to do a faithful renditions, looking at Mughal-e-Azam, of court culture using modern resources. So, so you see here on the right, Madhubala performing as Anarkali, dressed in Kathak dress, pretty much. which was not really stylistically accurate for the time, and she performs Kathak dance as well. And again, there were moves that were done at the court, but really this is modern Kathak. Similarly, you have sitars appearing all the way through here. The sitar didn't become an instrument of the court until the second quarter of the 18th century at the earliest. Similarly, the tabla, although here they do tend to use Pollock quite a bit. So it's important to remember that this is not necessarily accurate, but here it's faithful. So Mughal-e-Azam is a classic Mughal musical film in two ways. The first is that it is the classic courtesan tale. So I've written an article on this called The Courtesan Tale, where I look at examples of historical courtesans, not Anarkali, but other courtesans and female musicians who appear in Mughal historical chronicles between the late 16th and the mid 18th century. And it's really interesting to look at them because the story that is always told about courtesans who have names, i.e. ones who have been remembered in the historical record, is always exactly the same. You can actually transfer one woman to another scenario and it really doesn't matter because the story is always the same. A named courtesan always appears in a Mughal historical chronicle when she is about to be involved in the downfall of a prince. And now the downfall of the prince can be averted, as it is in Mughal-e-Azam, because of her sacrifice. And often a courtesan's sacrifice of herself is regarded as manly. But very often it's a tragedy. But of course, in this film, it is a tragedy for Anarkali because she desires Salim and she wants to be queen, but she actually really does nothing to do that except when she asks for her dying wish before she is executed by Akbar, which of course is, not actually, she doesn't end up being executed. To achieve her desire to be queen, and that she's just queen for a night. But her desire traps her. And what's really interesting about a song like Jab Pyar Kiya Darna Kiya is that this is just after she's supposedly betrayed Salim. So she's told Salim, or Salim has been told that she doesn't love him, and she's pretending that she's just doing it for money, or the golden bracelets, basically. And but the song that she sings and the love that shines out of her eyes gives her away. So you've got this ambiguity between, is this just a performance of love? Is it real? But of course, all the way through, her desire just shines out of her eyes. It's one of the things that makes, Madhubala so, she's so magical, her eyes are so magical here. Okay. So it's a classic courtesan tale. It plays out very much as you might imagine. Salim falls in love with her. This is a threat to him as a prince, and through tragedy and sacrifice on the behalf of Anarkali, everything gets fixed in the end. And Salim, obviously, after Akbar dies, becomes the Emperor Jahangir. A couple of other things to note here that are also true to life about this film, which is that neither Akbar nor Salim sing. They're not invoiced in Mughal-e-Azam. All the singing is done by Anarkali or Bahar, or by Anarkali's sister, and by Tansen, sort of off-screen, and the sculptor. And in the Mughal period, men would not sing. Courtly men, other men would sing, and they also would not dance. So this is something that's true to life. But But again, this is a modern tale because in the Mughal historical chronicles, the cautionary tale, the punchline at the end, the moral of the story of the courtesan tale was always to the man. It was always take heed, young man, young ruler, young general. Do not become, you can have whatever women you like, but do not become attached to a courtesan, or do not become too attached to music or to the other things that come with it, like drink or opium or whatever, because you will fall and you will die, or your kingdom will be taken away from you. This is the story of Baz Bahadur and Rupmati, for example, in Malwa, the ruler of Malwa. And you will only be redeemed by tragedy. And usually the tragedy is that the woman actually dies. So the moral of the story is for the man. But in modern Mughal courtesan tales, like Mughal-e-Azam, like Pakiza, the story is all about the trap that a woman finds herself in, the trap of desire, of being trapped between desire and duty. So it's actually a modern retelling, as is the end of the story, because I think there's no way that anybody could stand the idea that that this great modern hero of newly independent India, the Mughal Emperor Akbar, could do something as barbaric as walling a woman up alive. And so she has to be released. And there's a sense of releasing India to independence and freedom, actually, at the end of the film too. Okay. So I want to talk a little bit about the music now, because the other reason this film's classic is because it tries to be faithful, but not authentic, but faithful to the musical style through its use of the classical ragas, and also, of course, the ghazal song format with its Thai antara, so the A and B melodic sections that match up with the rhyme scheme, with the radif, and also use of qawwali, but for a love song, or rather the competition, Terry Mefame. In part, this is to wax lyrical and nostalgic about the music of the Mughal era and about Mughal power, the classical ragas stand-in for Mughal elegance and grandeur and beauty and seriousness and so on. And of course, you know, alongside the great film playback singers of the era, we have Bari Ghulam Ali Khan, who was convinced by Naushad to sing 2 songs in Rag at key moments. And here I just want to look at his performance. Unfortunately, because music doesn't actually sound good or work over streaming, so I'm not going to play it for you. You'll have to go and listen to it yourself later. But Rag Sohini, which he sings the song Prem Jogan Banke, as Salim and Anarkali spend the pre-dawn together in this kind of reverie. And Sohini was supposedly a favorite pre-dawn rag of the great Mughal musician Tansen. And here, this is the moment where you see the 2 of them together giving in to desire in this dreamscape of flowers. It is a soft rag, Sohini. It is a dreamy rag. It's a difficult rag. And it emotes longing and passive sensuousness. And it's an absolutely beautiful kind of dreamscape. Those of you who are interested, I'm not going to go into this in any detail. There's a great story on a website called The Great Bollywood Party of how the story of Naushad convincing Bari Ghulam Ali Khan to sing this song on screen, because he famously hated film, gets woven into the mythology around Mughal-e-Azam and around the great Mughals, in a way. So there's another use of rag in this film as well. So rather than just getting Bari Ghulam Ali Khan to go wild and sing this gorgeous song in Khayal style, Naushad himself composes in rag. And this is a particularly iconic scene, Mohabbat Ki Chuti, which is composed in rag darbari, and the whole setup of the scene is in darbari, and it's a very, very clever use of the kind of extra musical associations of darbari to underpin the message of this song and of the film. So darbari is the rag of the court, and it is supposed to have been composed by Tansen, the great Tansen. And here she's singing in rag darbari just after having been thrown in prison by the emperor for having met with Salim and having gone into the dream reverie. So she's arrested just after that moment. And she sings this song in darbari, which underpins the theme that although she's bewailing her fate at the hands of both the prince and the emperor, because she's stuck between them, between desire and duty, she's still underlining her duty to the empire, which she upholds to the end. And just to show you, and I find this quite difficult to do, I'm just going to switch between speaking and singing. So I'm going to sing a little bit of this song so you can hear how darbari is used. मोहब्बत की झूठी कहानी पे रोई मोहब्बत की झूठी कहानी पे रोए बड़ी चोट खाई जवानी पे रोए मोहब्बत की झूठी कहानी पे रोए. So you can actually hear there that बड़ी चोट खाई जवानी पे रोए is the shape of rag darbari. It's its root, and so through those words, when she's crying over her lost youth, torn between desire and duty, she's actually underpinning the whole time that her fate is wrapped up in doing her duty to the empire. It's really quite a remarkable song. And what's great about this too is that Love Story is false to her in two ways. Love has been false to her. She can't get what she wants, and she knows that. But she also now, in the next scene, is in charge by the emperor to be false to her true love in order to maintain the status quo. So saving her love means saving him for the sake of the kingdom and sacrificing herself. So we now kind of step through a mirror into a whole series of falsities where she is perhaps doing one thing but really doing the other, and we know throughout that her desire for Salim is real. And the emperor does things that he seeks to trick Salim through Anarkali's performance, but it doesn't work. And then at the end, he seeks to trick and succeeds Salim into believing that she has passed. And he charges her in the next scene that she now has to tell a false story of love, tell Salim that her love is false, in order to save both of their lives. And in the end, of course, she doesn't manage to quite save her own, but we know that she does. It's an extremely clever plot. So Rag Darbari is quite often used to evoke the Mughals, and we're now going to move on to Baiju Bawra, because the other great Mughal musician who's often portrayed in Hindi cinema is of course the great Tansen, and his rival, friendly rival, Baiju Bawra. So 1952, director Vijay Bhatt, and music again by Naushad, and full of rag everywhere you look, and two monumentally great Hindustani classical performers, D.V. Palaskar in voicing Bharat Bhushan as Baiju, and Ustad Amir Khan in voicing Surendra as Tansen. And of course, Muhammad Rafi also in voices Baiju for various of the other songs in this. And I just want to talk about these things very, very briefly. So we have this fantastic scene. This is the scene where Baiju climbs into Tansen's house intending to kill him. But he can't kill him because he is singing Rag Darbari so magically that all the paintings on the walls are coming alive and singing with him. The Apsaras and the Gandharvas, the celestial beings, are coming alive and singing with him. And so he can't actually kill him because his music is so connected to the world of the supernatural and the divine that he can't kill him. So another use of Rag Darbari here, and it's a fantastic scene. But the really exciting scene, of course, is the scene where Amir Khan and D.V. Palaskar face off against each other as rivals. And we also see here a rivalry between two different styles of classical musicians that began to emerge really in modern times from the late 19th century onwards. So you have the ascetic here emblemized, if you like, by Baiju, who does it entirely for God, and dresses simply, and eschews ornament and so on. And then, of course, you have the Darbari musician who gets his virtuosity from the divine, but perhaps is somewhat less spiritual. This is really, of course, a tension in Hindustani music itself throughout this period, from the Mughal period to the present day. This tension between virtuosity and devotion, both have to be there. But here it's done as a rivalry between these two musicians, and they sing Rag Deshi. And you can see them both here, the Darbari style on the left and the Bhakti style on the right, and both of them actually devotees of Swami Haridas, in fact, and they are melting a piece of marble with their rendition of Rag Deshi. So really great scene. Okay, so how does this get picked up? How does the Mughal historical epic take shape in the modern era and in contemporary terms? We're going to move on now to this wonderful film featuring Hrithik Roshan as Akbar and Aishwarya Rai as Jodha, two of the most beautiful people to grace the cinematic screen in the last several decades, in the titular roles of Jodha and Akbar. And the music, of course, is by A.R. Rahman and the lyrics by Javed Akhtar. What's interesting about this is the use of musical signifiers of the Mughal court in A.R. Rahman's repertoire are considerably more superficial. They take the role, they take on sort of semiotic power rather than being deeply rag-based. There's an awful lot of use of timbre to signify grandeur or particular things. So we see here two duffs being used and as part of this qawwali scene, so that sound plus the claps of that signify qawwali style, plus little bits of sargam, plus little bits of Tarana, plus little bits of Tan, but all within the confines of a 6-minute song. And that's completely scripted and not, or what we say in musicology, through composed and not extempore. So that's quite interesting. So it's got all the bits. It's got the nagma. It's got a little bit of tiny little bit of instrumental introduction. It's got the unaccompanied rubai section or doha section at the beginning, and then we move straight into the sthayantra of the main song. But it's a song that's underpinned by Western harmony. It's not underpinned by rag. And it also takes on this international Sufi flavor. I do want you to just have a look at those two fake instruments on right and left. Just take notice of those for a second. I'm just going to move on to the next slide. So here we have the qawwals getting up to perform the whirling dervish dance associated not with Indian or Pakistani Sufism, but with Mevlevi Sufism in Turkey. So there's this kind of international and very modern understanding of this. And of course, qawwals themselves, certainly not at this time, would never have themselves got up to dance. They would go into hal. Their job is to do this for the listeners, to help the listeners, facilitate the listeners going into hal. So this is a painting from the 17th century, about 1660, of the shrine of Hazrat Moinuddin Chishti at Ajmer. And you can see in the top left there, you have an Indian rabab, which is crudely represented by the strange, unplayable instrument props on the left and right here. And you see the two 5-symboled duffs or kanjaris here, but the dance moves that are represented here, or with the sleeves over the hands and so on, really have no relationship to the dance of the whirling dervishes. It's a completely different style. So we have this kind of superficial and internationalized style here, which is, not disrespectful. It's just modern and affected by modern world music trends. But what is fantastic about Jodha Akbar is the use of Mughal architecture and paintings to produce a visual landscape, including a visual landscape of music and dance that look like Mughal paintings, or what Mughal paintings might have been like. So the cinematographers and the set designers took inspiration from Mughal paintings and from architecture to create these extraordinary sets. This is the qawwali scene, which of course is meant to be at the shrine of Salim Chishti at Fatehpur. And this, of course, is Fatehpur Sikri today. And you'll see these kind of, they're tents in stone, as those of you who've studied Mughal architecture will know. They're tent. It's a campaign fortress or campaign tents, an encampment in stone here. This gets taken over into the set design and cinematography, but not just the places in which these things would have taken place, but also cognizant of the people, what kind of people filled these spaces, especially at celebratory moments. So this is a still from the song Azim Shan Shahinshah, which is a celebration where this is his first meeting with his new bride, Jodha, and they both get weighed. And this is quite an important point. So you can see, these open-sided, this sort of epic perspective, and also these masses of people and these tents in stone. I'm not 100% sure where this was filmed. At least part of it is a set, and I think that the Darbar Hall is in fact modelled instead on Shah Jahanabad, which is of course a lot later, but I'm not sure. So if anybody wants to correct me on that, you should feel free. And this really is inspired by Mughal painting. So this is Aurangzeb. It's Aurangzeb in Darbar, and this is a tent encampment. And you can see all these people filling the space, really reminiscent of this, from the front where the great emperor is, all the way to the Nobat Khana, which would have been a wooden erection. And you can see these great trumpets sticking out the top right at the back of the gate there, and also down on the right hand side a bunch of musicians and a little dancer there early in his reign, but also the celebrations themselves take their cues from particularly from Shah Jahan period paintings, which are just packed with people and with fireworks and with music and musicians. And you can see, particularly on the right here, you can see the trumpets of the Nobat ensemble, and at the bottom, the really big nakaras and just huge sense. These are what I call noisy paintings. And so we get onto the noisiness of Azim Shan Shahinshah, which uses the timbre of mass brass, mass percussion to make this humongous crowded noise. And these great instruments are called nafir or nafiri and karna. So the long metal trumpets are called karna. The smaller trumpets are called nafir, and the curved trumpets are known as sing, and they're usually the ones that kind of curve backwards. But these are faithful to paintings. And then, of course, you have these massive nakaras, otherwise known as damama, which you can still see plenty of all over Rajasthan and elsewhere. And these are just some closer images of paintings of the time, Akbarnama, and you can see both the curved and the straight trumpet and smaller nakara. And on the right there, this is Nensukh, and these enormous, great big long trumpets. And these are real examples. So this is from the fort of Amer, which would have been used throughout the Great Mughal period, and a disused big nakara, and you can see how big it is. I mean, some of these are absolutely huge and make huge sound. And it's a war band, but also there for celebration. So another topos that comes from Mughal paintings is as these circular dances, or the presence of courtesans in particular performing circle dance at the weighing. This is an example from the Padshahnama from Shah Jahan's reign, famously, of courtesans, Kanchani in this case, performing a circle dance, and accompanied by a serried ranks of male musicians. And of course, you don't have the bird's eye perspective to get the top-down view. And here are the same musicians in the Azim Shan Shahinshah, performing at the weighing, and this is the opposite folio. It's the same. These are two face-to-face illustrations of the weighing of Shah Jahan. So this one goes with this one, and this one goes with this one. So, sort of faithful to context, celebration, and visuals in many respects. But there's another added thing to this, which is that we end up with what is undoubtedly a Rasmandala. And of course, this is really significant because of the marriage of Akbar to Jodha and Akbar's known ecumenicism and his interest in Lord Krishna, and the importance of Lord Krishna in both the main Mughal films that we've been talking about, Mughal-e-Azam, and in this film. And you can see how close this top-down bird's eye view of the circle dance at the end of this song is to these Rasmandalas from Jaipur around about 1750. Unfortunately, I couldn't find exactly where these are in real life. I only found them on Pinterest, but they are 1750 in Jaipur. Okay, so this is not the first time at all that painting has formed the inspiration for Mughal film. So here you have this is the Ragragashri, just as Salim is returning for the first time to see his mother, Jodha, connecting the two films again. You see all the women of the palace celebrating and running around and giggling and singing and dancing. And here they're dancing and holding hands, and you have this many-tiered palace with all these open galleries. Really similar to depictions of women performing in palaces from the 17th and particularly the 18th century. This is one of my favorite paintings. It's of Faizabad or Lucknow, and you can see all the terraces and the number of different women doing different things. And there are several examples of this painting, actually, and some of them are different. One of them has a dancing girl balancing a wine bottle on top of her head, but not this one. Another thing that also comes from Mughal painting and Rajput painting is this idea that you counterpoise two women who are friends or rivals as playing Rajput and Mughal roles. And this is the famous Qawwali scene. And there are hundreds, thousands of similar paintings of women friends, usually in the Zanana, one of whom who will be dressed in Rajput style or as a Hindu, and the other one of whom will be dressed in Mughal style or as a Muslim. And the art historian Molly Aitken, who's working on these paintings at the moment, says that she thinks that there's a real play here with identities, of playing with otherness of Mughal and Rajput together, but separate, together but different, which is going on here, similar to the kind of play of, is this real desire or is this performance? Okay, and one last one. You know, you see these serried ranks of multiple musicians. This doesn't happen in real life. And of course, sitars are not accurate for the time period of Mughal-e-Azam. But here we have paintings of serried ranks of performers. This is Muhammad Shah playing Holi. And it's interesting that this, of course, is the scene where Madhubala as Anarkali performs as Radha. So I now finally want to wrap up by talking about how this iconography from films about the Mughal period has now been taken over into contemporary films today, leaving behind the Mughal inspiration. So we have this kind of series of mirrors that we're going through. And I just want to move on to very briefly onto Bajirao Mastani, which is a film that I love, actually. I think it's a fantastic film. Love the music. 2015, Sanjay Leela Bhansali, and also composed a lot of the music with Ranveer Singh as Bajirao and Deepika Padukone as Mastani, and she's voiced by Shreya Ghoshal, and Kashibai is played by Priyanka Chopra. So it is really interesting, and you can see this with the film Padmavati as well, that films of the second half of the 2010s onwards that are set in the medieval and Mughal eras, regardless of who the characters are that are being focused on, draw even further from international cinematographic style. If you look at Padmavati and compare it with the Ridley Scott film Kingdom of Heaven, which is actually one of my all-time favorite films, which is about Salahuddin or Saladin and the Siege of Jerusalem. The visual connections are stunning, but what's even more stunning are the references in the score to the Kingdom of Heaven score. But here, with Bajirao Mastani, we have the influence not of the Mughal era or of Mughal art itself, although sort of it is reflected, but of Mughal films. So I want to look particularly at Diwani Mastani, which includes my pet hate. So I find the use of mandolin in this scene incredibly irritating because, of course, mandolins are entirely a European instrument. But they are also extremely iconic in Hindi film. And you need to think particularly of DDLJ and the use of the mandolin played by the Shah Rukh Khan character. And there's this kind of leitmotif, this mandolin leitmotif that signifies the flowering of the full love between Kajol and Shah Rukh Khan towards when he finally arrives in Punjab. Mandolin, very iconic in Hindi film, but here I think it's just being used to say foreign, or perhaps I don't know, West or Central Asian or something, but it's a European instrument. So this is irritating to me for multiple reasons, but nonetheless. This film draws extensively on the visuals from Mughal-e-Azam. So there are two Krishna songs, one in Mughal-e-Azam, Mohe Bhangat Pe Nandlal, and the other in Bajirao Mastani, Mohe Rang Do Lal, where you can see the visual influence and the influence of the dance is really, really clear, including the fountains and the musicians and the chorus of dancers and everything. But in Diwani Mastani, the song itself, there's this really striking blow-by-blow chronological homage to this song, Jab Pyar Kya Dana Kya, which is the one where just after poor old Anarkali is dragged back up from prison, is told by Akbar, you have to pretend to Salim it's all fake, and your love is fake. And so she performs this song for him. So I'm just going to take you through these slides and show you the visual similarities. So here we have Bajirao, here we have Akbar, and you can see all the shiny mirrors everywhere in these scenes. The appearance of Mastani, the appearance of Anarkali, the moment when she begins to sing, this view actually from the women's quarters, but from above down to the circle in the middle. Very, very similar. And getting towards the end, the spinning, and this time from a bird's eye view. And here we have it from Mughal-e-Azam. Okay. And we have this remarkable mirrored hall. So, I mean, the big difference here is that this has the makes use of the international luxury hotel aesthetic, with everything beige and shiny, as opposed to the much more, sort of colourful aesthetic of the original Mughal-e-Azam performance. But nonetheless, it's really striking, the homage that this is playing. And so we come out the other end of mirrors upon mirrors to a situation where you have a historical epic that pays homage to an earlier film that itself pays homage to the Mughal court and Mughal period. And I just want to end with this rather lovely slide here, which is, of course, of Anarkali circling forever in the mirrors of the mirrored hall. Thank you very much. I shall stop sharing now.
Thank you, Dr. Katherine Schofield. Beautiful lecture, as always. Hard to say whether we enjoyed this time or the last time. Both the times we really learned a lot, not only enjoyed, but also learned. I hope you are ready to take up some of the questions.
Absolutely, yes.
So there is a question by Mr. Ali Heather. Madam, what are the early sources that mention that Emperor Aurangzeb was accomplished veena player? And did Mughals use music in wars and for treating mental patients just like Ottomans?
Thank you. It's a wonderful question. So I am not 100% sure where the idea that Aurangzeb was a veena player comes from, but he was certainly extremely accomplished in the arts of music, probably singing. He had a number of music treatises written for him from the 1660s right through until 1698. And he was clearly an aficionado. So, he paid the Kalawant, Khushal Khan Kalawant, who was the great-grandson of Tansen and the chief musician of Aurangzeb. He paid him 7,000 rupees for one performance at his coronation in, I think it was 1665. So, extremely proficient, well known for his love of music. His son, Muhammad Azam Shah, was known himself as a composer and singer of khayal and of other songs and poetry in Brajbhasha. And as the patron of the great 18th century musician Sadarang in his youth. So there's plenty of evidence of certainly of his abilities as a connoisseur and as a reader of music theory. Not exactly sure where the idea that he played the veena came from, but there is that famous painting of him called Aurangzeb in a Shaft of Light, which is said to be by Hunhar, and it's about 1660, and it has him sitting with two musicians, one of whom, and there's a Rudravina on the floor. So it may be from that painting, in fact. And yes, Mughals used music in war. So they used the Norbat ensemble, those enormous trumpets and shawms. So a bit like the European oboe or the shenai, if you're more used to the shenai in India, as their battle for battle drill and to scare people. And it was pretty scary. It's a huge sound. And there is a whole section of a treatise on medicine written for Aurangzeb's brother, who he killed, Darashikoh, which is on the use of the Hindustani ragas to treat patients using the Unani physiological system. So yes, is the answer.
Right. There is another question by Mirza Hasnain. Did Lal Kuwar, the wife of Emperor Jahandar Shah, contribute anything to music? and what new dancing styles were introduced in Mughal period?
Thank you. That's a really good question as well. The answer really is we don't know, because she is the classic courtesan tale. So she was related to Niamat Khan Sadarang in some way. We don't know exactly, sister or cousin or something. And of course, Jahandar Shah made her his chief consort, which of course offended all the old nobility. And she was used as an excuse by the historical chroniclers for why Jahandar Shah was dethroned and murdered. And of course, then she was herself put away for the rest of her life. So she really only appears as this kind of catalyst in the downfall of a prince, which is her role. But she must have been extraordinary. She must have been magnificent. We don't really know. There's a whole pile of really interesting biographies of courtesans of various kinds in the Muraq-e-Dehli, written by a traveller from Hyderabad, Dargah Quli Khan, who came up to Delhi in 1739 to 41 with the Nizam. And he was actually there when Nadir Shah invaded. And he writes about Nurbai, who was the great courtesan of the time, who Nadir Shah wanted to take away with him, but I think she managed to escape that fate as well. But he tells us about a number of those women and what they specialized in, and she was a really magnificent khayal singer. But a lot of them, really took their cue in terms of training from their ustads, and in her case, she was learning with Sararangji. New dancing styles. So this is best covered by the work of Margaret Walker, who has written a book called India's Kathak Dance in Historical Perspective. And she writes about the dance that is now called Kathak, and which was the hereditary property of male dance teachers, but which was also frequently taught to courtesans of various kinds. And one thing we can say is that in the 18th century, because you get a huge number, everybody's on the move, and you get a huge number of new troops of courtesans coming in from the northwest, from Punjab, from Peshawar, from further afield, from Afghanistan, and what they brought with them were things like four-square tals. So teen tal becomes a really big thing in the late 18th century, whereas it hadn't been before, and that's because it really is a dance groove. Same with something like dadra. It's a dance groove, and kaharwa, which becomes huge, and also for qawwali from Punjab, it becomes a dance. It's got this dance groove, and so we have some idea that this is influenced by dance, but it's hard to tell. But I definitely recommend the work of Margaret Walker. So,
well, there is a comment by Suresh Balchandani. He's quite surprised that a European scholar is writing about this topic. But let me inform Balchandani ji that I would have been more surprised had Indians be writing about it. Because apart from Shahab Sarmadi Sahab, I don't think that anybody else has taken up any serious study of music, what to talk about the influence of music on Bollywood or other places, whether it is Katherine Schofield or it is Dalli Dalwai or a budding scholar from Australia. They are all foreigners. In fact, shame on us Indians that we have actually not paid attention to the our cultural aspects as much as we should have done. Now,
Well,
Muhammad, yeah, please.
but watch this space. So I am training PhD students, and I've just trained a woman called Radha Kapuria, who is from Delhi, and she's been working on 19th century Punjab and 20th century Punjab, and she's now at the University of Sheffield. And there's a woman called Ayesha Shet, who's also from Delhi, and she's currently at UPenn, and she's working on the period 1450 to 1600, and looking at musical culture. So, I see it as my job to train new scholars, and hopefully many more of them will be Indian.
Excellent.
Yeah. So.
Yeah. So you are there to help them, but they should also come forward to be helped. That is the
yes. So the more the merrier.
Yeah.
Please come.
So there is a question by Muhammad Aftab Alam. No, he had a comment. The question is from Hasnain Aziz. Hasnain Aziz says, "Ma'am, do you think that Karan Johar's upcoming movie Takht, which will be based on Mughal war of succession between Aurangzeb and Dara, will bring back the positive depiction of Mughal period in Bollywood? And have you searched about any European or non-Indian movie which was set in Mughal era?"
Okay, they're both really good questions. I'm really looking forward to Takht. I am. It remains to be seen how it will be handled, but I like Karan Johar's films. So we'll have to wait and see. It's quite interesting that views of Aurangzeb, have changed so much since his own time, that it's actually, it's inevitably going to be a modern take on it, but it will be really, really interesting to see what he does with it. If you are interested at all in a slightly earlier story which involves music, I have a podcast which is called The Orpheus of Delhi, and you can get it on iTunes or SoundCloud or Google Play. Look for Histories of the Ephemeral or The Orpheus of Delhi, and it tells the story of how Khushal Khan Kalawant magically used music to sway the War of Succession in Aurangzeb's favor.
Okay.
Which is an 18th century story. So it's a mid-18th century story. Whether or not it happened or not, I have no idea. It seems rather unlikely, but it's a great story. So yeah, have a look for that. Goodness, it would be great if there were more. There have been there's been a TV series recently called Beechwood House, which was Beecham House, not Beechwood, which was set in the period of Shah Alam II. So late 18th, early 19th century. It's a TV series, and the director is Gurinder Chadha, and it's a bit Georgette Heyer, but in India. So it's it's not. It's I really enjoyed it, but it's I also found it a little bit irritating. But that's probably the closest thing I can think of recently, other than really silly things like Sharp's Tiger, which is actually about Tipu Sultan, and it forms part of the Bernard Cornwell Sharp books series about the Napoleonic Wars and immediately prior. And there's been a TV movie length episode made of that, which is quite fun. But no, I wish.
Let's have another question. There's a question by L.M. Mahfouz Priye. How far these films maintained the decorum of costumes, architecture set, food, dialogues, emotions, as mentioned in primary sources?
That is a really, really great question. And the answer is, it really varies. It really varies because, as I was saying, just from the point of view of musical instruments, they're not using the musical instruments that would have been used at the time. They would have played the Indian rabab, and the rudravina would have been the chief instruments, and they would have been accompanied by pakawich for Drupad. And later in the 17th century, they would have used dholak and duff to accompany khayal. Sarangi, of course, beautiful sarangi was there, but no sitar, no tabla, no. But we're trying to. The point about being faithful is that you try to use modern resources to make something that is sort of imaginatively true or emotionally true. And I think by using rags that still by and large mean the same thing that they did then, and people have, through a history of listening and being taught how to listen, because you have to be taught how to listen to rags, and what they mean emotionally. And a series of those, that kind of embodied and emotional knowledge does get handed down to a certain extent. And certainly with Mughal Azam, the lyrics are beautiful. And, that poetry, that realm of metaphor is familiar from the period of Mir and Soda, and of course from the period prior to that, from the 17th century, from poets like Bedil were writing in Persian. So those things I think are still there, but they change. The form around them changes, if that makes sense. You actually need, when you're doing something historical, to be able to give the audience a sense of truthfulness that in their terms, which they might not get from something that was completely authentic, if that makes sense, or completely done as it was done then. But yeah, it really varies.
Let us have the next one, please. And next one, again, a comment, a question, which somehow I think Katherine has given a reply, but I would also add to that later on, talking about Shahjahani arches and so on. So I'll also have to say something on that in the end. Mahfouz Priye asks, in my view, can we have, in my view, historical movies should be taken seriously before it's preparing. Legal arrangements should be made by government and its team, should include historians of all specializations.
Yeah.
If wishes had wings.
I know. So it is really striking. So I think part of the thing is that what stands as Mughal style in the Hindi cinema, particularly today, is the Shahjahani style. That's the style that everybody's used to, the sort of the elegant cusped arches and so on. And although if you're going to do Akbar, then of course it has to be red. So but and it is very interesting when you I went to Agra Fort recently, having not been for a really long time, and it was just so obvious when you move from the Akbar period through to the Shah Jahan period, the difference in architectural style. It's really quite staggering. So yes, and I agree, historians should be working on the detail. That's why I get annoyed with things like mandolins being used, whereas I don't mind sitars, but yes, I agree.
Let us have the question by Aftab Alam. Aftab Alam says, there has been truly historical and favorable treatment of many characters of Mughal times in popular Hindi cinema. But in recent times, there has been cinematic attempts at vilification of characters of Muslim rulers
Yeah.
from pre-Mughal times, like the Padmavat. The
Mm.
character of Alauddin Khilji had been demonized. This vilification and demonization of Muslim characters in general, as well as the rulers and conquerors by the popular Bollywood cinemas, have already served the purpose of creating. Uh, mm, just a moment. Um, the Muslims as enemies, as an important ingredient of political communalism of Hindutva variety today.
Yeah.
You are right, Aftab Alam, in your comment. I don't think that any further justification for what you are saying is needed. Yes, let us have a question, please. This is just a comment by Aftab Alam, which to a great extent we would agree with him. The question is by Gunjan Malhotra. Uh, Also, can musical performances at particular moments, occasions like coronation of king or any other conquest, can have special connotations? Since the Mughals believed in astronomy and astrology, so peculiar music at peculiar moment could have significant meanings embedded in astrology.
Absolutely. Yes. It was all very, very connected. And actually, I don't know if my previous talk is still available online, but you should have a look at that because I explain exactly how the science of this worked. So the Mughal music theorists believed, that that's just telling me to go and pick my child up from school, which is not happening today. So they believed that the seven swaras, Sare Gama Padhani, each one was ruled over by one of the celestial bodies visible to the naked eye: the sun, the moon, Mars, Mercury, Venus, Saturn, and Jupiter. And that just as the seven celestial bodies move through the 12 houses of the zodiac, so the seven notes of the sargam move through 12 positions. So which is where you get Komal and Shud and Tivra notes. And so therefore your use of particular notes directly channeled astral power. And was their explanation for why music had power over the emotions and how you could use particular rags that emphasize particular notes to push somebody's emotional well-being in one direction or the other. So if they were feeling melancholic, which is cold and dry, you vim them up with notes that are hot and wet. And so that's how it works. And of course, there are some amazing paintings where you have astrologers and musicians present at the same moment because they are both needed to pinpoint the moment of a birth or the moment of a marriage, and then to you can't have the music happen before the correct moment. It has to happen at the correct moment for the music to have its auspicious effect. So it was very important.
Can we have the next question, please? Again, a question which is very interesting, and I would also be commenting in the end.
Yes,
Is
please.
the love story of Anarkali and Salim real and supported by early sources? And do you think that Jodha Akbar was actually Mariam-uz-Zamani, the Rajput wife of Akbar?
Okay. So I'm going to leave the second question because it isn't the Akbar period isn't my main area of expertise, actually, and I know other people and particularly Nadeem Zab will have a more accurate answer for you. But on the Anarkali story, what I can say is that there are very early sources for her existence. So we have European sources for her life from the early 17th century, from the period of Jahangir's reign. So, and Jahangir, of course, was Prince Salim. So it seems quite likely that her story is based on a real story. Whether or not her tomb in Lahore is in fact hers is another story altogether. But I know that the British believed it was her tomb. And again, perhaps Nadim Saab can say something about that.
Next one, please. Well, I'll add to that later on.
Yeah.
Next one. Gunjan Malhotra. Ma'am, I wanted to ask, like you highlighted in the beginning, how music was used as a technology to induce emotions. So can we say that use of particular kind of music with peculiar rags and instruments were used to arouse particular kind of emotions? If so, don't you think using music tactfully to tame good omens onto the emperor's side can be a part of ideology of kingship?
Yeah, absolutely. And this is also incidentally why so many ragamalas, so both the music texts and the sets of poetry and the sets of paintings were made for kings or rulers of various kinds, including Surendra Mohan Tagore in the Bengali musicologist in the late 19th century, producing a set of ragamalas for Queen Victoria on the occasion of her jubilee. So which are quite interesting, actually. But yes, so particular ragas and particular instruments were definitely used to arouse particular kinds of emotions. And with the ragas, it's quite straightforward. Most treatises will actually tell you what emotions particular ragas are supposed to induce. And sometimes it's apparent from the ragamala paintings or the verbal descriptions or the poetry that go with them. But the other thing is that 18th century texts talk about speed. So talk about the fact that slow speeds should be used to induce contemplation, and fast speeds should be used to induce courage or desire, depending on what was required. So in order to whip somebody up who was about to go into battle, you use fast speeds, and there is a physiological basis for that. And you use slow speeds for contemplation. We still use music as a technology to stimulate or destimulate ourselves in various ways, and it does have a physiological effect. So yes.
Right. Are there any other questions? Zoya Zedi, Dr. Zoya Zedi, she is a physician. Do you think that Mughals' adaptation to Indian culture was the secret of success of Mughals in ruling India and being loved by their subjects?
Undoubtedly. And actually, I'm not the only person who says this. The late Christopher Bailey, C.A. Bailey, the great historian of colonial India, pointed out that one of the reasons why the British failed was because they did not understand what he called the affective knowledges of Indians. They weren't interested in them, and they didn't understand them. And he meant them the music, the dance, the religion, and religious devotion, and the poetry. It wasn't true of some individuals. Some individuals had a serious, understanding of Indian literature and so on, but most of the British didn't understand it, and that's why they were not as successful as the Mughals and weren't accepted ever as being, legitimate. So,
I must thank Dr. Schofield. There are a number of other questions, but I think we would end with this one because otherwise there is no end to asking questions. Rush RH, I'm sorry if I am pronouncing your name wrong. You mentioned that many courtesan stories in Bollywood are essentially interchangeable because of some common formulas. Do you see this changing at all, or do you think that this formula with accompanying music, etc., is here to stay?
It's a really good question. It's already changed. So if you look at the heroin vamp dichotomy, which comes originally from the kind of heroine courtesan dichotomy, it's already changed so that frequently the heroine takes on the characteristics of what used to be the vamp in, say, a party scene or something like that. It's already changed. But what had already changed by the time you get a film like Pakiza in the early 1970s, and even in Mughal-e-Azam, is that the vessel of the story remains intact, but the meaning of the story has already changed. It's no longer a cautionary tale for men. It's now a cautionary tale about the choices of women. And that's something that happens in modernity. It's a modern retelling. But you can look on my academia.edu page, because my Courtesan Tale article is available there, and you can read it for free, open access, and that'll tell you all about it.
Well, right, Catherine. I think you did a great job of highlighting at least three films together: Mughal-e-Azam, Jodha Akbar, and sorry to use the term, a copy of the first for a dynasty which was trying to copy the Mughals themselves.
Yes.
So no harm. I mean, the Maratha court was also, a copy of the Grand Mughals. So if a movie is being made copying on the same theme, I see nothing new in that.
Yeah.
But thank you for pointing out those scenes from this particular film. As you rightly pointed out, that there are a number of things which are very rightly depicted in Mughal-e-Azam, faithfully depicted, I should say. There are certain aspects which are faithfully depicted in Jodha Akbar. But, both the films have certain drawbacks.
Yeah.
For example, the history part in Jodha Akbar by by Ashutosh Gowarikar is much better than the magnum opus of K.R.C.
Yeah.
Although Mughal-e-Azam is much more famous, and whenever we think of Akbar, in our imagination, Prithviraj Kapoor comes in our mind.
Yeah.
But as far as historical depiction is concerned, although not 100% true, there are many glaring mistakes which have occurred. For example, the very character Jodha is a character which is mythical. Not it's just a story.
Yeah.
It's an imaginary character invoked by both Mughal-e-Azam and by Jodha Akbar.
Yeah.
But at least when Ashutosh Gowarikar was making his film, he did try to contact a number of historians. He consulted a number of historians. And the historians had a very, vehement, dialogue with him. Fortunately or unfortunately, I also, although was very junior, but I also became a participant in that. And during one of the conferences, seminars in which all these people had come, I and Professor Shirin Musi were also there trying to argue with them that please pay attention to what the historians are telling you.
Yeah.
And in return, we were being told that historians, granted that what you are saying is very, very correct, but our job is to make a fantasy.
Yeah. Yeah.
So if we become very, very faithful to what the actualities were,
it would be very boring.
Who would see the movie? and and we had to bow to that. But in spite of that, when Jodha Akbar movie starts, there is a placard which plays, which says that this is all mythical and it's just a
Yeah.
story, no more, no less.
Yeah.
Uh, Both the films, uh, as you pointed out, that there are certain scenes in Jodha Akbar which architecturally are much better
Mm.
reproductions of what the actuality was. For example, the concept of the tent city,
Mm.
the type of double story tents which you showed in your slide, is something which is, though Ashiana tent, which is discussed by Abul Fazl in Ain Akbari. This was a typical tent where on the upper story would be the Khwabgah,
Mm.
where the emperor would be sleeping for the night, and in the ground floor would be the guards. A similar structure you would find in the hilly regions, where the cattle would be tied in the ground floor, and on the upper floor would be the place where they would be living, so that they are safe from the wild animals. So even in these, moving encampments, this was the type of arrangement which we see in Jodha Akbar. In fact, we are informed by the whole encampment is discussed by not only Abul Fazl but also by a number of
Mm.
European scholars. And
Mm.
if you pay attention to what they are telling you about the moving Mughal encampment, and go and observe the Fatehpur Sikri town, the palatial complex, it's a replica of the Mughal encampment. The only difference is that the wooden and cloth tents have been now replaced by stone
Mm.
architecture. So that much I would believe
Mm.
is better shown as far as Jodha Akbar is concerned. But there are scenes there, as somebody pointed out, that cusped arches of Shah Jahani period are visible, which is a major irritant. Uh,
Yes.
for a historian is a major irritant. But why only pick up Jodha Akbar throughout Mughal Azam? That is
Oh.
the issue. Because in Mughal Azam, the palace, wherever it has been shown, or the sets which have been made, are based on the architecture of late 17th century, 18th century Rajasthan.
Yeah.
Such big, massive halls. For example, the hall where the Anarkali is dancing. You would never find in Akbari architecture at all. I mean, whenever you go to Fatehpur Sikri, imagining
Mm.
Mughal Azam, you will be disappointed because there are hardly any rooms. You would find, dark chambers
Mm.
and open fields,
Yes.
open grounds, right? So that is one of the problems with in these films, which. But then you were concentrating only on music, on which I don't have to comment. Uh, you also pointed out that very rightfully, that throughout Mughal Azam, Akbar or any imperial person is not shown singing.
Yeah.
Very good that K. Asif at least maintained the decorum of the Mughal
Yeah.
authority. But then there are other films made during the same period where Shah Jahan is shown serenading around Mumtaz Mahal.
Yeah.
So there are, I mean, in Bombaya films in Bollywood, apart from Mughal Azam, and there are films where they have not taken care, and they have shown these princes and princesses also in dancing around the trees, which is very, very odd, which would never take place as far as the Mughal period is concerned.
No, no,
Now,
you have people to do that for you. You don't do
yes,
it yourself.
yeah. Now, let me come briefly, although much time has passed, on this aspect of the character of the existence of Jodha and
Mm.
the existence of Anarkali. As I said already, that Jodha is a piece of imagination,
Yeah.
a creation of 19th century villagers
Mm.
of Sikri. By 19th century or late 18th century, the palatial complex of Fatehpur Sikri was occupied by the villagers. They were living there. Hmm.
Yeah.
They had made residences. Ultimately, Lord Curzon came, and then it was evacuated, and from a village, it turned into a ground for the Britishers. In
Mm.
fact, that in one of the palatial complexes at Fatehpur Sikri, there was a tea house with a board in front of it that dogs and Indians are not allowed inside,
Yeah.
and with mem sahibs and sahibs enjoying their coffee and
Yeah.
drinks within that palace.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now, during that period when Lord Curzon started maintaining these structures and tourists started coming there, the villagers started acting as guides. Till
Mm.
date, if you go there, most of the guides at Fatehpur Sikri now they carry that badge of ASI, but
Mm.
they are almost all of them untrained people.
Yes.
I know. They have been born within those precincts. They know something or other about it, so they tell you fantasy tales. One of the tales which they told was the tale of Yodha.
Mm.
And the Shabistan-e-Iqbal, the Haramsara of Akbar, was identified as Jodhabai Palace.
Yeah.
There was a tomb of Jodhabai situated somewhere between Fatehpur Sikri and Agra. Again, an unidentified structure was
Mm.
suddenly identified as the tomb of Jodha. But during the revolt of 1857, it was blasted off by the
Yeah.
Britishers. So that was an end to that. Now, just before the tomb of Akbar, there is a beautiful red sandstone structure
Mm.
which is known as Mariam's tomb.
Yeah.
Uh, it is also supposed to be associated with the wife of
Mm.
uh, Akbar. I'm not going into the details of who Mariam was, whether there was a Mariam or no Mariam, but let me just say that the researches which were conducted by historians like Satish Chandra, I'm not going to name all of them,
Mm.
but researches which were done by Satish Chandra and others show that there was a Rajput princess, no doubt, who was married
Yeah.
to Akbar.
Yes.
There is no denying that there were a number of Rajput princesses who were married to Akbar, but a particular one known as Jodhabai, we do not know. There was a princess of Jodhpur who was married to Prince Salim,
Mm.
the son of Akbar.
Right.
So, if at all there was a Jodhabai or a princess from the house of Jodha, then it was the daughter-in-law of Akbar
Mm.
rather than wife of Akbar.
Yeah.
The whole, this myth of Jodhabai, which was in fact created by the villagers of Fatehpur Sikri,
Mm.
got magnified with Mughal Azam.
Mm.
The
Yeah.
type of depiction which went there, and slowly and gradually, Jodhabai started occurring even
Yeah.
in some of the modern textbooks.
Yeah.
And some of the modern historians started to swear that yes, there was a Jodha.
Yeah.
When Jodha Akbar was being made, there was a controversy whether Rani Jodha was actually a Rajput or not a Rajput. And there were also, clashes between them over a mythical character. As far as Anarkali is concerned, as Dr. Katherine Schofield has just pointed out, and I would beg to differ a little from her. She
Please.
says that she is a historical character because she is mentioned in the sources of Jahangir's period. Unfortunately, the problem is that this fantastic story is being narrated only by some of the European
Yeah.
travelers,
That's
and
right.
none of the Mughal sources talk about it.
Yeah.
Possibly, it was just a fantasy tale. There was There were fantastic tales which were circulated by Manuchi during the period of
Oh,
Shah Jahan
yes.
and Aurangzeb. I personally believe that similarly, this tale of um, Anarkali was just a spin
Mm.
story based on some, uh, maybe some real courtesan of
Yeah.
that period.
Yeah.
No denying the fact that Jahangir was having sexual relations with a number of courtesans,
Of course.
a large number of them. So probably a story of that type. But
Mm.
this whole myth of Anarkali, as it is now being printed,
Mm.
shown to us, along with her tomb, which exists in Lahore, and not only a tomb but a whole bazaar,
Oh,
Anarkali bazaar, which is there. That is all a myth.
yeah.
Anarkali tomb is nothing but an unidentified tomb,
Mm.
which was labeled as Anarkali's tomb. Today, it is a public library,
Yeah.
or some converted into a type of an office.
Yeah.
I would just end whatever I have been saying by pointing out that there is a very interesting short uh, article, well researched paper by Professor Shirin Muswi,
Mm.
The Invention and Persistence of a Legend, the Anarkali Story, which was published in Studies in People's History journal, which is taken out by Aligarh Historical Society. If I remember correctly, it is in 2014 that this article was
Mm.
printed, although it was presented by Professor Muswi a few years before its printing during the course of one of the sessions of the Indian History Congress.
Mm.
She goes on to bunk this whole, thing. Uh, Last comment. Sorry, I'm taking
Mm.
much time.
Please.
When you look at the miniatures, where you have shown singing and dancing and
Mm.
other things going on, the depiction of women is of three types.
Mm.
You know, the motherly figure.
Mm.
Uh, Always especially if you pay attention to the Akbarnama paintings, because
Mm.
you also invoked a number of Akbarnama paintings. Whenever Akbar's mother or wet nurse is being depicted, she is wearing, just like Akbar, very plain type of
Mm.
clothes. I mean, Akbar himself is always shown either in white or very light yellow or light green, very, I mean, normal earthen colors.
Mm.
Similarly, the mother and the wet nurse of Akbar, wherever they are depicted, they are also depicted very simply.
Mm.
The thing is, which distinguishes them is they are always shown in the center of the painting,
Mm.
number one, and number two, uh, in the scale of drawing, the figure of the mother is always very prominent, so that your eye would fall on her, that
Yeah.
here is the mother figure. The second type of women which are shown are the wives.
Mm.
For example, Noor Jahan,
Mm.
idealized
Yes.
images.
We don't know what they looked like.
Hardly any, we just don't know. There is one painting of Noor Jahan which certain historians claim that it is probably true. No one knows,
Yeah.
because no artist was allowed to go into the harem.
No.
And three or four, women painters who are known, they never painted the portraits of the princesses or the queens. So we just don't know. Possibly they are all idealized, one type of image representative. And then, of course, the courtesans,
Mm.
always decked in jewelry, beautiful clothes and see-through clothes, and their busts open, and
Yeah.
I mean, and this, this sensuality, whatever you may say, uh, keeps on getting enhanced when you move from imperial paintings,
Mm.
bazaar paintings, and then later on to the Rajasthan style of
Yeah.
paintings. which survive the latter Mughal style of painting,
Mm.
as you called it. So this is only what I had to say. That always to end, I would say that the courtesans are always shown as a vamp,
Yeah.
uh, whereas mother is stately and blessed.
Mm.
The wife is idealized.
Mm. It's
Uh,
great. It's a
right.
great taxonomy.
Yeah, yeah. And there are a number of paintings where music is being played while these women are sitting in the court. Sometimes there is a cordon in between. The music is playing outside, but they are in a hearing distance. If you go to Fatehpur Sikri, there is a place from where they could have observed, uh, mm, they be being unobserved by others because they are sitting behind lattice screens. They
Mm.
could observe the proceedings of what is happening within the court and the instruments which are being played there.
Mm.
I'm sorry I took much of your time, uh,
No,
but it was a beautiful lecture,
thank
uh,
you.
and I hope that further works would be done. I particularly believe that the representation of the Mughals in Bollywood films should not be seen only with the help of Mughal-e-Azam, Jodha Akbar,
Mm.
but there are a large number of other movies also which have been
Oh, yeah.
made. So I think a time would come when someone would be working on them, because they might not be the correct, depictions of the past,
Mm.
but they are the imaginations of what we think about the Mughals, their opulence
Absolutely.
today.
And that's an
Uh,
incredibly important thing.
that is a very important thing, and I hope that somebody takes up this topic. If already someone has not,
Mm.
Catherine would be knowing better that
Well,
this
I'm
is which you being one of them who has taken up such a work, and I hope that more work should be done on
Mm.
music, and more work should be done on the depiction of the Mughals in this modern day art. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And once again, thank you for being with us a second time.
Well, thank you
Good
for having me.
to all.
Bye-bye.
Goodbye. Bye.